Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the online edition of the History of the Fashion in the Long 19th Century. This is the first time I've been doing this course online, so let's hope it works as I planned it. I hope you were present at the live introductory meeting, so you know what we will do, what kind of information and materials you will get each week, and what to do with them. So without further ado, let's begin. So we are going to talk about clothing, we are going to talk about clothes, and clothes are an interesting subject from a cultural studies point of view because of their intimate quality, as they lie next to the skin of the wearer usually, and they inhabit the space of private life. Also, clothes are very often the embodiment of the self, the expression of the self, and also of the group identity. So there is always the tension between what the wearer wants to convey through their choice of clothes and what the culture expects them to wear, basing on all kinds of factors, from the very material factors of the availability of clothes, of availability of fabrics, of the climate and such things, to symbolic and psychological considerations and taboos, like the appropriateness of clothes to a given occasion. So that's a very basic introduction. We are going to take a diachronic look at the fashion of the long 19th century. It means to analyze the clothes and customs relating to clothes over a period of time. The period of time chosen for this scope is the long 19th century. Those of you who know a little bit about the 19th century already will recognize this is the period from around the French Revolution to the outbreak of the First World War. This is a very interesting time in very many ways. And fashion, the changes in fashion, the changes in the clothes that people wore and the clothes that were available for them reflect very well the changing society, the changing economy of the Western world. We are going to focus mostly on Britain, but of course there will be some aspects of other fashions, like French fashion. Of course, France still was considered to be the world capital of fashion. So I think this is a very interesting period, and I hope, if you are not convinced already, I'll try to convince you during this semester. So the first question here is, which was first? Which came first? Was it the material considerations, the material needs, that is something that is usually expressed through the word clothing? Climate, textile production, the need to shield off from the cold, or rather it was the psychological aspect, something that would rather refer to costume than clothing itself. So psychological conditions such as the symbolic aspect of clothes, religious beliefs, magic, also the social position, but personal taste would also come here. So which one was first, clothing or costume? Nobody knows really. I leave you with that question open because nobody has conclusively proven either way. Of course, there is archaeological data to suggest that humans, as they started to migrate from the warm areas of Africa to colder climates, they started to cover their bodies for practical reasons because of the rain and the cold and the wind, and they wanted to shelter themselves even as they were moving. So that was well, the clothing aspect. But most of you, if not all of you, probably know the story of Adam and Eve, one of the foundational stories of at least the culture of this part of the world, in which the first humans start wearing simple covering, not yet clothes, but some covering made of leaves, because they feel ashamed of their nakedness. So it's nothing connected with the rain and the cold. They have a psychological need to cover their genitals because they feel ashamed of them. So if you think it's just a myth, it's just a story, and it wouldn't really go very far back in history, think about such aspects of culture as, let's say, body painting or body adornment, which dates back probably as far as the cave paintings. So, and it has nothing to do with the material conditions. It was just for adornment, for magical protection probably, maybe to indicate a special position within the group, to identify with heroes or totemic animals or something like that. So purely symbolic and psychological reasons. So that would mean that costume is older than clothing. I don't know. I leave it open. Probably it evolved together. Probably it evolved so quickly, one after the other, that we will never really know which one was actually the first. But this is one of those interesting origin stories in the material culture of humans, regardless really of their geographical background, if you think about that. So what can you deduce from the clothes? What symbolic meanings can be deduced from the clothes? Starting with the body painting or any kind of clothes, concluding with the clothes that you are wearing today. Because if you think that clothes are just innocent thing you put on without much thinking and there is no symbolism in it, I hope to change your mind. So there are lots of symbolic meanings that can be deduced from clothes in general. Later on we will focus on the clothes from the long 19th century, but if we look more generally, you can find a lot of examples. For example, identification with heroes or totemic animals, something I mentioned already. So wearing the skins or the claws or the feathers of some culturally important creatures for magical protection, let's say, or for religious purposes. We can deduce who is the leader in the group through the clothes. So the position of leadership very often includes special clothes, more expensive clothes, more expensive adornments made of precious materials such as gold or silver or precious stones or expensive furs. And just by looking at an individual, within a group especially, you can be able to identify who is the leader. It could give warriors or soldiers military advantage, either through magical protection, so once again impairing on them the strength or resilience of some totemic animal, or through camouflage. The modern army basically depends on camouflage and uniforms. Uniforms are quite important because then you know who's in your group and who's the enemy. So to give the military advantage, to reflect political convictions. If you think about, let's say, the clothes worn by the Chinese during the communist regime of Mao, one of the first things they did was to introduce a kind of uniform for the people to wear. When we talk about the French Revolution, you will see how important delivering the proper message concerning your political conviction was during the time of the revolution. It would actually mean the difference between life and death. If you showed some sympathy for the aristocracy and the royals, it could get you guillotined. So, of course, if we look at, let's say, political conventions of any political party, anywhere, they usually have their symbols, they have their colors. If we think of the American political campaigns, the Democrats and the Republicans have their distinctive colors, and you just know by looking at the group of people whether they have blue or red symbols and flags and banners, which of the parties they support. We can tell the social rank of a person by looking at their clothes. It could be a professional rank, like the uniforms of doctors or judges. It could be, of course, a position of privilege, like the judges. Especially in Britain, they wear very elaborate clothes, looking very old and venerable, with wigs and all kinds of strange things. This gives them the extra support of the ancient institution that they represent. Or it could denote a low rank, for example, prison uniforms. Or, have you ever been to a hospital? They make you wear your pajamas, the first thing you do. Why? Not because you have to stay in the bed all the time unless you are very ill, but to make sure you are never taken for a doctor or a visitor. So your position within the hospital is marked through your low position. It's marked through the fact that you are forced to wear pajamas. Also, things like religious beliefs. Wearing any kind of religious symbols is an obvious thing. For some religions, like in Islam, it could be very elaborate and could actually, in case of women, cover most of their bodies. So you look at a person and you can assume with a high degree of probability that this or that woman is Muslim. So you can probably go on, you could probably continue the list of symbolic meanings that can be deduced from clothes. I leave you to wonder, and we will return to this when we talk about specifically clothes from the 19th century, because they all have symbolic value, and usually it's more visible with some time lapse between ourselves and the clothes that we are observing. That is why I believe it's easier to analyze from the cultural point of view the clothes from the 19th century than the clothes from this year or last year. Because this refers to something that we'll talk about today in a little moment. The principle that can be called the transparency of fashion. The transparency of fashion means that once it's fashionable, it's not really treated as symbolically meaningful. Wrongly, of course, because it always is, but that's it. If we talk about basic types of clothing from the historical perspective, there are basically 5 types of clothing. Number one piece, loose draped clothing, like an Indian sari, for example. So you have one piece of clothing and you just drape it around your body. Then you have one piece clothing with a head hole. So like a poncho, there is a head hole, you put your head through the hole and you drape the rest around you. Then we have closed, sewn clothing with sleeves, something that is made of many pieces sewn together, something like a dress or a shirt. So much of the modern clothing really falls into this category. Then there is another type of sewn clothing which is open, which is not closed, so it doesn't cover much of the body or 2 sides of the body. It's worn over other clothes for added warmth or added layer, like a jacket or a coat. And then there are garments that are tight-fitting and intended for the lower half of the body. So basically the trousers. That's the types of clothes. And if we look at the evolution of clothes, the development of clothes, the historians usually refer to 3 phases. The first phase is from the antiquity to roughly the 14th century, with not many changes, no national character. It was usually long and draped, so nothing tailored, nothing too fancy and too difficult. Similar for all social groups. So if you look at ancient Greek or Roman clothes or clothes from the early Middle Ages, that's basically what you have. Then from the 14th to the 19th century, we have more individual and national character of clothes appearing. We have really the beginning of fashion, understood as, let's say, changing popular styles and colors and accessories that are followed by, especially by the people who could afford it, so the upper class and the upper middle class. They are indicative of the social class, so clothes are supposed to indicate your wealth. They are more concerned with economy and politics and less with religion. If we look at the medieval clothes, much of it is inspired by the Christian religion. Later, if we look at 18th century clothes, and we will look a little bit more about at 18th century clothes before we talk about the revolution, you will see it's more about the social class and less about the religion. And then from the 19th century until today, basically, it's, the European expansion. So almost the entire world wants to wear European style clothes, starting with America and then through America globally. Clothes are less individualized. They are more international, and they are less individuals for one very important reason. This is the beginning of the mechanical production. So people buy clothes rather than have them made to measure. This is something that starts in the 19th century, and nowadays almost all clothes are bought ready-made rather than made by specialized tradespeople. So that's the first thing. Perhaps to conclude this section, I would like to stress that fashion is always a part of culture. Culture at any given moment forms a complete whole. So if we take a historical garment, we need to treat it as an emissary of the culture that produced it. The emissary meaning the ambassador or the embodiment. So it can tell you a lot about the culture, about the materials that were available, about the beliefs of the people, about the modes of production and buying of clothes, about how people knew that something was fashionable or not. Also a lot about the society, the customs, the social expectations of different social classes, of different genders. So of course clothes are worn by everybody, men and women and children as well, but they reflect, and it's especially visible in the 19th century, the changing social structure of the Western societies, including Britain, and the changing attitudes towards gender roles. So if you take something, a dress, a shoe, a hat, a piece of jewelry, you can not only date it, which I hope you will learn this semester, but you can tell a whole story about not only a particular wearer, but the society this wearer came from. So costume and custom go together. Customs meaning behaviors, types of greetings, whether the greetings would be elaborate or more reserved. If you think, for example, about the 17th century big hats with feathers, they invite very elaborate greetings. And that's what they were supposed to do. Dances, popular dances, influence the clothes, and also dances become popular because of what you can do wearing fashionable clothes of the day. So when the clothes were more restricting, they were more stiff and structured, the dances would be they would allow less free movements of the body. So this is all connected. You'll see later today some examples of the interior designs from the 19th century. And of course, they follow the same rules. And the people wearing particular styles in clothes would wear them in particular designs of interiors. So let's say the design of the chair is relative to the design of the dress. If you have a big dress with some so-called dress improvers like the crinoline or the bustle, you cannot really sit on a small chair because you will not fit there. You need special types of chairs to accommodate such dress. The type of shoes is relative to walking. Were certain shoes appropriate to go outdoors? And would you need pavements? Would you need a city with paved streets? Or would you need the interiors? Or perhaps these shoes were... Come here, Watson. That's Watson. Come here. That's my cat assistant. You will meet him probably. Come here. No, he's shy. So the type of shoes relative to the type of walking. If you live in the country, there is mud everywhere, so you have to pay attention. So that's it, and we continue in the next part.